Travis Kelce was supposed to be at a charity gala in downtown Kansas City, shaking hands with donors and posing for photos in his tailored suit. Instead, he found himself driving through the industrial district at 11 p.m., following GPS directions to a homeless encampment that he'd heard about from a local news report. It wasn't planned. Earlier that day, Travis had watched a segment about rising homelessness in Kansas City, and something about the location underneath the Highway 35 overpass near the old steel mill had triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. The area looked familiar, like somewhere from a dream, a half-forgotten childhood adventure. The Bentley felt obscenely out of place as Travis parked near the chain-link fence that separated the encampment from the road. He'd changed out of his formal wear, opting for jeans, a hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low, but he still felt like an outsider stepping into a world he didn't understand. The encampment was larger than he'd expected, maybe 40 or 50 tents arranged in rough clusters, with shopping carts and tarps creating makeshift boundary between living space. A few people sat around small fires in metal barrels, their faces illuminated by the flickering flame. Most kept to themselves, but Travis could feel eyes following him as he walked deeper into the camp. "You lost, man?" A gruff voice called out from beside a blue tarp stretched between two shopping carts. "Maybe," Travis replied honestly. "I'm looking for someone, but I'm not sure if he's here." "This ain't a hotel registry," the man laughed, but not unkindly. "What's the name?" "Danny Reeves," Travis said, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so many years. "Probably goes by Daniel now. Mid-30, tall, thin, really smart guy." The man's expression shifted slightly. "Danny? Yeah, he's here. End of the row, orange tent. But fair warning, he don't like visitors much." Travis's heart began to race as he made his way toward the orange tent. Danny Reeves, his best friend from ages 7 to 17, before college and career and life had pulled them in different directions. The kid who'd helped Travis with algebra, who'd taught him how to throw a perfect spiral, who'd been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship and a future that seemed limitless. The orange tent was smaller than the others, positioned slightly apart from the main cluster. It was meticulously organized, a small camping chair positioned precisely outside the entrance, belongings arranged in neat piles under a carefully constructed tarp awning. Even homeless, Danny maintained the obsessive organization that Travis remembered from their childhood. "Danny?" Travis called softly, approaching the tent entrance. The movement inside the tent stopped completely, as if whoever was in there was holding their breath. "Danny, it's Travis Kelce." A long pause. Then, a voice that was unmistakably familiar, despite being rougher around the edges. "Travis Kelce doesn't visit homeless camps at midnight." "This one does, apparently," Travis replied, trying to keep his tone light despite the emotion building in his chest. "Can I see you, man? It's been a long time." The tent zipper moved slowly, and a face emerged that was simultaneously exactly as Travis remembered and completely transformed. The same intelligent green eyes, the same sharp cheekbones, but everything else had changed. Danny had lost at least 40 pounds since high school. His hair was longer and unkempt, and his skin had the weathered look of someone who'd spent years outdoors. "Jeez Christ," Danny breathed, staring up at Travis from his position crouched in the tent entrance. "It really is you. It really is," Travis confirmed, crouching down to Danny's eye level. "Mind if I sit?" Danny gestured to the camping chair, then climbed out of his tent and sat cross-legged on a folded blanket. For several minutes, neither man spoke. They just looked at each other, two childhood friends separated by what felt like an impossible distance. "You look good," Danny said finally. "Success suits you. You look..." Travis struggled for words that wouldn't sound patronizing or pity. "You look like you've had a rough go of it." Danny laughed, a sound that held no humor. "That's one way to put it." "Danny, what happened?" "Last I heard, you were graduating from MIT with honors. Some tech company in Boston was offering you stupid money right out of college." Danny's expression darkened. "I turned down the job." "Why?" "Because my mom got sick," Danny said simply, as if that explained everything. Travis remembered Mrs. Reeves, a kind woman who'd always made sure there were snacks waiting when he came over to study with Danny. She'd worked double shifts as a nurse to support Danny's education after his father left when they were kids. "What kind of sick?" Travis asked gently. "Early onset Alzheimer's, diagnosed when I was 22, right before graduation. She was only 54. Danny's voice was matter-of-fact, but Travis could see the pain behind his eyes. The doctors said she had maybe 10 years, but that the progression would be rapid. She needed full-time care. There are facilities that she couldn't afford, Danny interrupted, and that I wouldn't put her in anyway. She spent her whole life taking care of other people. I wasn't going to abandon her when she needed me most. Travis began to understand the trajectory that had led Danny from MIT graduate to homeless encampment. So you came back to Cleveland to take care of her. Sold my car to pay for the move. Took a job at a local electronics store. Nothing that used my education, but something that let me work around her doctor appointments and care needs. Used my college fund to retrofit the house with safety features. Hired in-home health aides when I could afford them. For how long? 8 years, Danny said quietly. 8 years of watching the smartest woman I ever knew slowly forget how to tie her shoes, how to use a fork, how to recognize my face. 8 years of medications and doctor visits and trying to maintain some dignity for her as her mind disappeared piece by piece. Travis felt his throat tighten. Danny, I had no idea. If I'd known, what would you have done? Danny asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. You were building your own life. College, NFL draft, becoming a star. Would you have given that up to help me change my mom's diapers? The question hung in the air between them. Travis wanted to say yes, wanted to believe he would have been that kind of friend, but the truth was more complicated. At 22, focused on his football career and his own future. Would he have understood the magnitude of what Danny was facing? She died 2 years ago, Danny continued. The house was already in foreclosure. I'd been burning through my savings for years, and eventually, the electronics store went out of business. Lost my job, lost the house, lost everything except the $10,000 in debt from her final medical bill. Jesus, Danny. I tried to get back on my feet. Applied for tech job, but explaining an 8-year gap in your career when you were supposed to be building experience, nobody wanted to hear it. I was overqualified for entry-level positions and underqualified for anything that matched my education. Slept in my car for a while, then the car got repossessed. Danny gestured around the encampment. Been here for about 18 months? It's not so bad, actually. There's a community here, people who look out for each other. I help some of the other folks with paperwork, navigating social services, use the skills I have. Travis stared at his childhood friend, trying to process the enormity of what he'd just heard. The kid who'd been destined for greatness, who'd had the intelligence and opportunity to change the world, had instead sacrificed everything to care for his dying mother. Danny, Travis said carefully, I want to help. Whatever you need, a place to stay, job connections, paying off those medical bills, just say the word. Danny's expression immediately hardened. No. What do you mean, no? I mean no, Travis. I appreciate the offer. I really do. But I don't want your charity. This isn't charity. This is friendship. Is it? Danny asked, his voice gaining an edge. Because I haven't heard from you in 15 years. Not a Christmas card, not a Facebook message, nothing. And now you show up here and want to rescue me like I'm some kind of project? Travis felt the accusation hit home. Danny, that's not... Look, I get it. You're a good guy, Travis. You see an old friend in trouble and you want to help, but I've made my peace with this life. I have dignity here, believe it or not. I don't need to be Travis Kelce's charity case. That's not what this would be, isn't it? Danny stood up, brushing dirt off his worn jeans. Face it, man. We're not the same people we were in high school. You're an NFL superstar with millions of fans, and I'm a homeless guy living in a tent. Whatever friendship we had died a long time ago. The words stung, partly because Travis recognized the truth in them. They weren't the same people they'd been at 17. But looking at Danny now, proud, stubborn, still brilliant despite everything he'd been through, Travis saw flashes of the friend he'd once known better than anyone. Maybe you're right, Travis said, standing as well. Maybe we're not the same people, but Danny, the guy I knew, wouldn't have hesitated to accept help if he needed it, and he sure as hell wouldn't have been too proud to let a friend care about it. The guy you knew had options, Danny replied. He had a future. This guy learned that sometimes caring about people costs everything you have. As Travis walked back to his car, Danny's words echoed in his mind. But there was something else bothering, something beyond the obvious tragedy of his friend's situation. Something in Danny's eyes when he'd talked about his mother's illness, a look of recognition, of fear that went beyond grief. Travis had the unsettling feeling that Danny was hiding something, something even worse than what he'd already revealed. And as he drove away from the encampment, Travis made a decision. He wasn't going to let 15 years of silence stand between him and the person who'd once been the most important friend in his world. Whether Danny wanted his help or not, Travis was going to find a way to save him. He just had no idea that what he'd uncover would be far more devastating than anything he'd imagined. 3 days later, Travis returned to the encampment with a different approach. Instead of his Bentley, he drove an old pickup truck he'd borrowed from his equipment manager. Instead of trying to rescue Danny, he simply brought coffee and donuts for the entire camp. "Smart move," said Marcus, the man who'd directed Travis to Danny's tent on his first visit. "People here don't trust charity, but they appreciate respect." Travis spent an hour talking with various residents, learning their stories and understanding the complex social dynamics of the camp. There was Sarah, a former teacher who'd lost her job and apartment after a medical bankruptcy. There was James, a veteran struggling with PTSD who couldn't navigate the VA system. There was Maria, who'd aged out of foster care with no support system and nowhere to go. Each story was heartbreaking, but they all shared common threads: bad luck, impossible choices, and a system that punished vulnerability. Travis began to understand why Danny felt dignity in this community. These were people who'd been abandoned by society, but who still looked out for each other. "He's been watching you since you got here," Marcus mentioned, nodding toward Danny's tent. "Hasn't come out, but I can see him peeking through the tent flap. Maybe he'll talk to me today." Travis: "Maybe, but fair warning, Danny's been acting stranger than usual lately, more withdrawn. Sometimes I'll catch him talking to himself, or he'll forget things we just discussed. The stress of this life gets to everyone eventually." Travis felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. He'd noticed something similar during their conversation 3 days ago, moments where Danny seemed to lose focus, where his responses didn't quite match the questions being asked. When Travis approached the orange tent, Danny emerged before he could announce himself. "You're back," Danny observed. "I brought coffee," Travis offered, holding out a cup from the cardboard carrier. "Thanks." Danny accepted the coffee and gestured for Travis to sit in the camping chair. "Look, about the other night, I was probably harsher than I needed." "You were honest," Travis replied. "I deserved it. I should have tried to stay in touch. We both should have. Life gets complicated." Danny sipped his coffee, then looked directly at Travis. "Can I ask you something? Why did you really come looking for me? After all these years, what made you think about Danny Reeves?" Travis had been dreading this question because the honest answer made him sound either crazy or incredibly selfish. "I saw a news report about this camp, and something about the location triggered a memory. Remember when we were kids and we used to explore the old industrial area? There was that abandoned factory where we'd ride our bikes." "The Hartley Steel Plant," Danny said immediately. "We must have spent 100 afternoons there that summer before 8th grade. "Right. When I saw the news footage, I recognized the area. It made me think about you, wonder what you were up to. So I looked you up online and found nothing," Danny finished. "Exactly. No social media, no professional listing, no trace of you anywhere. For a guy who was supposed to be changing the world with technology, you'd gone completely off the grid." Danny was quiet for a long moment. "There are reasons for that, such as some things are better left in the past." Danny's tone carried a finality that suggested the conversation was over, but Travis pressed on. "Danny, I've been thinking about what you told me. About your mom, about the 8 years of taking care of her. I did some research on early-onset Alzheimer's." Danny's body language immediately changed, his shoulders tensing. "Why would you do that?" "Because I wanted to understand what you went through, and because," Travis hesitated, then decided to be direct, "because I'm worried about you." "Worried how?" "The other night, there were moments where you seemed distant, like you were having trouble following the conversation. And Marcus mentioned that you've been acting differently lately." Danny set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Marcus needs to mind his own business. Danny, early-onset Alzheimer's has a genetic component. If your mom had it at 54, stop." Danny's voice was sharp, cutting through Travis's words like a blade. "Just stop. I'm just saying, if you're experiencing symptoms—" "I said stop." Danny stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "You don't know what you're talking about." Travis remained seated, keeping his voice calm. "Then explain it. Help me understand." For a moment, Danny looked like he was going to storm into his tent and end the conversation. But then, something in his expression cracked, and he sat back down heavily. "You want to know why I don't have social media?" Danny asked quietly. Why I went off the grid? Why I live in a tent instead of trying to rebuild my career? Yes, Danny stared at his hands for a long time before speaking. 3 years ago, I started forgetting things, little things at first, where I'd put my keys, appointments I'd made. I told myself it was stress, grief, the exhaustion of being a full-time caregiver. Travis felt his stomach drop, but he remained silent. Then, bigger things started happening. I'd be in the middle of helping my mom with something and suddenly not remember why I was there. I'd start sentences and lose track of what I was saying. One day, I got lost driving to the grocery store I'd been going to for 20 years. Jesus, Danny. I saw a neurologist when my mom was in hospital. Cognitive tests, brain scan, the whole workup. Danny's voice was barely audible. Early onset Alzheimer's disease, familial form, same genetic mutation my mom had. Travis felt the world tilt sideways. How early? I was 33 when I was diagnosed. I'm 35 now. The progression varies, but given how quickly my mom declined, Danny shrugged. The doctors said I probably have 2, maybe 3 good years left before the symptoms become severe. The information hit Travis like a physical blow. His brilliant, complicated, stubborn friend wasn't just homeless. He was dying, slowly, inevitably, in the cruelest way possible. That's why you disappeared, Travis said, understanding flooding through him. Why you don't try to rebuild your career. What's the point? Danny asked. Why struggle to get back on my feet when I know I'm just going to lose everything again? Why burden anyone with caring about someone who's going to forget their name? Because those 2 or 3 years matter, Travis said fiercely. Because you matter. Danny shook his head. Travis, you don't understand what this disease does. I watched my mom go from a brilliant nurse to someone who couldn't remember how to swallow. I held her hand while she looked at me with no recognition, like I was a stranger. That's my future. That's what I have to look forward to. All the more reason to make the time you have left count. This is counting. Danny gestured around the encampment. Here, I can help people with paperwork and navigating systems while I still remember how. When I start declining, I can just disappear. No one will have to watch me deteriorate. Danny, you can't just give up. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. Danny stood again, this time with more control. Travis, I appreciate that you want to help, but what I need most is for you to understand why I can't let you. I don't understand, because in 6 months, or a year, or maybe 2 years, I'm going to start forgetting things that matter, important things, and eventually, I'm going to forget you. I'm going to look at you, my best friend from childhood, and see a stranger. Nietzsche. Danny's voice broke slightly in the last word, the first crack in his emotional armor that Travis had seen. I've already started having bad days, Danny continued. Days where I can't remember what year it is, or why I'm in Kansas City instead of Cleveland. Days where I look in the mirror and don't recognize my own face. It's getting worse. Travis felt tears he'd been holding back finally spill over. Danny, please, let me help. There are treatments, clinical trials. That might buy me a few months, maybe, at the cost of everything I have left. Danny's expression softened slightly. Travis, you're a good man. You always were. But the kindest thing you can do for me is let me handle this my own way. What if I can't do that? Then you're going to watch me die slowly, and it's going to break your heart. And when I'm gone, you're going to spend the rest of your life wondering if there was something more you could have done. Danny met Travis's eyes directly. Trust me, I know what that feels. As Travis drove away from the encampment for the second time, Danny's words echoed in his mind, but alongside the grief and frustration, a different emotion was building. Determination. Danny might have accepted his fate, but Travis hadn't. And if his friend thought that a terminal diagnosis was going to make Travis abandon him, then he'd clearly forgotten how stubborn Travis Kelce could be when someone he cared about was in trouble. The question wasn't whether Travis was going to help Danny. The question was how to help someone who was determined not to be saved, and whether there was enough time left to make a difference. What Travis didn't realize was that his next move would set in motion a chain of events that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could imagine, and that the real battle was just beginning. Dr. Sarah Martinez closed the file folder and leaned back in her chair, studying Travis across her desk at the University of Kansas Medical Center. As one of the leading Alzheimer's researchers in the Midwest, she'd seen desperate families before, but rarely had someone of Travis's profile walked into her office seeking help for a friend. Mr. Kelce, she said carefully, What you're describing about your friend's situation is unfortunately not uncommon. Early onset familial Alzheimer's is devastating precisely because it strikes people in their prime and because the genetic component makes the progression somewhat predictable. But there are treatments, Travis pressed. Clinical trial, experimental therapy. I've read about people who've slowed the progression. There are interventions that can help with symptoms and potentially slow cognitive decline in some patients, Dr. Martinez confirmed. But I need to be clear about the limitation. We're talking about potentially buying months or a year of better cognitive function, not a cure. Travis shifted forward in his chair. A year of Danny being himself is worth everything to me. What would he need to do? First, he'd need comprehensive evaluation and testing to establish his current cognitive baseline. Then, depending on his specific genetic mutation and progression pattern, we might consider him for one of several ongoing clinical trials. What's involved in those trials? Dr. Martinez pulled up several files on her computer. The most promising current studies involve experimental medication that target amyloid plaques in the brain. The treatments require regular infusion, extensive monitoring, and frequent cognitive assessment. Participants essentially commit to being full-time patients for the duration of the trial. And the success rates? In our most optimistic scenarios, we've seen cognitive decline slowed by 30 to 40% in some patients. That might translate to 18 months of relatively stable function instead of 12, or maintaining independence for 2 years instead of 1. Travis felt a surge of hope. That's significant. It is. But Mr. Kelce, there are substantial barriers to consider. First, your friend would need stable housing and a strong support system. Clinical trial participants need to attend appointments twice weekly, sometimes more. They need someone to monitor their medication compliance and watch for side effects. I can provide all of that. Second, the emotional and psychological demands are enormous. Participating in these trials means confronting the disease head-on, tracking every lost word and forgotten moment. Some patients find it more difficult than accepting the natural progression. Travis thought about Danny's stubborn independence, his insistence on maintaining dignity even while living in a tent. He might resist the monitoring. Which brings me to the most important point, Dr. Martinez continued. Participation has to be voluntary. We can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped, especially in cases involving cognitive decline. The patient has to be actively engaged in their treatment. Travis left the medical center with a folder full of information and a growing sense of urgency. Danny had made it clear he didn't want help, but Travis couldn't accept that his brilliant friend was simply going to waste away in a homeless encampment when treatments existed that might give him more time. The solution came to him as he sat in his car outside the medical center. If Danny wouldn't accept help from himself, maybe he could be convinced to accept it for others. 3 days later, Travis returned to the encampment with a proposal that he'd spent hours crafting. He found Danny sitting outside his tent, helping an elderly woman named Dorothy fill out disability paperwork. "You're good at that," Travis observed, settling into the camping chair Danny kept for visit. "It's just logic and patience," Danny replied, not looking up from the form. "Dorothy, you need to check this box if you've been denied benefits before." "Thank you, honey," Dorothy said, her weathered hands shaking slightly as she wrote, "You're an angel." After Dorothy returned to her tent, Travis looked at Danny directly. "I have a proposition. I told you—" "Hear me out," Travis interrupted. "What if I told you there was a way to help people like Dorothy, Sarah, and James, people in this camp who are struggling with medical issues and disability claim, while also contributing to research that could help future families dealing with Alzheimer's?" Danny's expression became wary. "What kind of research?" The University of Kansas Medical Center has several clinical trials for early-onset Alzheimer's. They need participants, especially people with your specific genetic marker. Travis pulled out the folder Dr. Martinez had given him. But more than that, they need advocates, people who understand both the medical system and what it's like to navigate social services without resources. Travis, you'd be doing exactly what you're doing here, just with better resources. Helping people understand their options, advocating for patients who don't have family support, contributing to research that might help other families avoid what you and your mom went through. Danny was quiet for a long moment, scanning the information Travis had provided. And the catch? You'd be enrolled in the trial yourself. Regular medical monitoring, experimental treatment, cognitive assessment. Think of it as insider research. "I see what you're doing," Danny said. but his tone wasn't angry. "You're trying to trick me into accepting help by framing it as helping others. I'm offering you a chance to make your experience meaningful," Travis replied, "to use what you're going through to help other people." Danny read through the clinical trial information more carefully. These treatments, they don't cure the disease. No, but they might slow it down. Give you more time to help people, more time to make a difference, more time to burden people with caring about me, Danny countered. "Danny, you helped Dorothy with her paperwork for an hour today. Did that feel like you were burdening her? That's different." "How?" Danny was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with the decision. "Where would I live during the trial? I can't exactly commute to medical appointments from a tent." "I have a guest house," Travis said carefully. "It's private, has its own entrance. You'd have your independence." "Travis, or there are other options. Transitional housing program, assisted living facilities that work with research participants. The point is, there are solutions if you're willing to consider them." Danny looked around the encampment, taking in the other residents going about their evening routine. "What about the people here? They depend on me for help with paper advocacy, translating medical jargon. The patient advocacy position at the medical center would let you do that on a larger scale. You'd help people from all over the metro area, not just this camp. And when I start declining, when I can't remember how to help anyone," Travis leaned forward, "then we'll figure out what comes next. But Danny, that might be 2 years from now instead of 1, 18 months instead of 6. Isn't that worth something?" "Is it?" Danny asked, and Travis could hear the genuine uncertainty in his voice. "Is watching me deteriorate slowly really better than letting me disappear on my own terms?" The question hung between them, highlighting the impossible choice Danny was facing: fight a losing battle against a devastating disease, or maintain dignity through acceptance of an inevitable decline. "I can't answer that for you," Travis admitted, "but I can tell you that the Danny Reeves I knew never walked away from a challenge, especially one that might help other people. The Danny Reeves you knew didn't have Alzheimer's, no, but he had something this disease can't take away, at least not yet. He had the ability to make other people's lives better, and right now, there are families dealing with what you and your mom went through, and research programs that need someone who understands both sides of the equation." Danny was quiet for a long time, staring at the clinical trial paperwork. "If I did this, and I'm not saying I will, there would have to be conditions." "Name them." "No publicity, no feel-good stories about Travis Kelce saving his childhood friend. If word gets out about our connection, I'm done." "Agreed. I make my own decisions about treatment. If I decide the side effects aren't worth it, or if I want to stop participating, that's my choice." "Of course. And when the time comes, when I'm too far gone to make rational decisions, you don't try to keep me alive out of sentiment. You let me go with whatever dignity I have left." The final condition hit Travis like a physical blow, but he nodded. "I promise." Danny folded the paperwork carefully and handed it back to Travis. "I need to think about it." "How long?" "Give me a week. I need to talk to some people here, make sure they'll be okay if I leave." As Travis drove away that night, he felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since reconnecting with Danny, but he also felt the weight of the promises he'd made, especially the last one. What Travis didn't know was that Danny had already made his decision, and it wasn't what Travis expected. Danny was going to say yes to the clinical trial, but not for the reasons Travis hoped. Danny was going to participate in the research because he'd realized something in the past week. His condition was progressing faster than he'd admitted to anyone, including himself. The bad days he'd mentioned were becoming more frequent, and he was starting to lose time in ways that scared him. If he was going to help, if he was going to make his remaining cognitive function count for something, he needed to act quickly. The clinical trial would give him access to the best medical monitoring available, which meant he'd know exactly when his abilities were declining beyond useful. And when that time came, Danny had a plan that he hadn't shared with Travis. A plan that would ensure he never became the burden he was terrified of becoming. But first, he was going to give his brilliant, dying mind one last chance to make a difference in the world. 6 weeks into Danny's participation in the clinical trial, Travis thought things were going better than he dared to hope. Danny had moved into the guest house behind Travis's property and thrown himself into the treatment regimen with methodical intensity. More importantly, He'd embraced his role as a patient advocate with remarkable effectiveness. "He's extraordinary," Dr. Martinez told Travis during one of their regular check-ins. "I've never seen a patient advocate with Danny's combination of personal experience and emotional intelligence. His cognitive test scores have actually improved slightly since baseline." Travis felt relieved until he heard Danny's voice from the guest house one evening, talking loudly enough to carry across the courtyard. "No, that's not right," Danny was saying, his voice frustrated. "The appointment was Tuesday, not Thursday." Travis looked out his window and saw Danny standing in his kitchen, holding a calendar and talking to himself with increasing agitation. "What day is today?" Danny asked the empty room. "What day is today?" Travis crossed the courtyard and knocked. He found Danny surrounded by calendars and appointment cards, his face pale and hands shaking. "I can't remember what day it is," Danny said quietly. "I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to figure out if today is Monday or Wednesday." "It's Tuesday, Danny. October 15th. Tuesday. That means my appointment with Dr. Martinez is today at 2 p.m. "Danny, it's 4:30. Your appointment was 2 hours ago." The color drained from Danny's face. "I missed it? Do you remember going?" "I remember getting ready. I remember driving to the medical center, but then..." He paused. "I don't remember the appointment itself. I remember being in the parking lot. Then suddenly I was back here." Travis called Dr. Martinez's office on speaker. "Oh, Mr. Reeves didn't miss his appointment," the receptionist said. "He was here right on time. Dr. Martinez saw him for about an hour. He seemed perfectly fine when he left." Danny and Travis stared at each other. "I don't remember any of that," Danny whispered. "I have no memory of being at that appointment or driving home." "How long have you been having episodes like this?" Danny looked down. "This is the first one this severe, but there have been gaps. I'll find notes in my handwriting that I don't remember writing." Travis picked up one of the calendars. Some entries were in slightly different handwriting, as if written by someone with impaired motor skills. "We need to call Dr. Martinez." "No, not yet." Danny pulled out a notebook from the stack of paper. "I've been tracking my symptoms more carefully than I admitted." The notebook revealed pages of detailed observation. October 1st. Forgot how to work the coffee maker for 10 minutes. October 3rd. Got lost walking back from the mailbox. October 7th. Found myself in the grocery store with no memory of going shopping. October 12th. Woke up at 3 a.m. fully dressed, sitting in my car in the driveway. "Danny, why didn't you tell me about it?" "Because I knew what you'd do. More medical monitoring, more interventions for something that can't be stopped. These episodes are getting worse." "Yes, and they're going to continue getting worse." Danny met Travis's eye. "The clinical trial isn't just about helping other people. It's about having medical supervision during my decline so I can make informed decisions about the end." "What do you mean?" "I want to know exactly when I cross the line from being Danny Reeves with Alzheimer's to being someone who used to be Danny Reeves. And when that happens, I want to have choices." Travis's phone rang. Dr. Martinez's name appeared on the screen. "Travis, is Danny with you? I just reviewed his appointment notes, and I'm concerned about inconsistencies in his responses." Travis put the call on speaker. "Dr. Martinez, Danny's having memory issues about the appointment. He doesn't remember being there. That's troubling. During our session, he seemed completely lucid. If he has no memory of that conversation..." In some Alzheimer's patients, we see masking, the ability to function normally in familiar situations, even when cognitive function is significantly impaired. Danny may have been able to engage through muscle memory, even though his brain wasn't forming lasting memories. Danny leaned toward the phone. "Dr. Martinez, I need you to be completely honest. Based on what you observed today and what you're hearing about my memory loss, how much time do I have before I lose the ability to make rational decisions?" A long pause. "If these episodes are increasing in frequency, possibly 6 to 9 months before your decision-making capacity becomes significantly impaired." 6 to 9 months, not the years they'd hoped for. "Thank you for being honest," Danny said. "Can we schedule a meeting to discuss end-of-life planning?" After the call ended, they sat in darkness. "I'm sorry," Danny said finally. "For what?" "For making you care about someone who's dying." "Danny, I never stopped caring about you, and I'm not going anywhere, even when I don't remember who you are, especially then." As they sat together, both men understood they had crossed a threshold. Hope had been replaced by a more complex reality. They would fight this disease together, but they would also face its inevitable victory together. 3 months later, Travis found Danny at 6 a.m., staring at a computer screen filled with text. Danny had been awake since 4, using his early morning clarity as his condition progressed. "How long have you been up?" Travis asked, setting coffee beside Danny's keyboard. "Since about 4. I wanted to finish this while my mind is still clear." Travis saw a document titled Letters to Family, A Guide Through the Darkness, page 47 of what appeared to be a comprehensive manual. "It's everything I wish someone had told me when my mom was diagnosed," Danny explained. "A practical guide for families dealing with early-onset Alzheimer, how to navigate the medical system, financial planning, what to expect during each stage." Travis scrolled through chapters on maintaining dignity during loss of independence and planning for the end while living in the present. Dr. Martinez thinks it could be published. There's nothing like it available for family. Danny clicked on another file. "I've been recording video messages for the families I work with. Advice for specific situations they'll face. Encouragement for their worst days." The folder contained dozens of video files, each labeled with a family name and topic. "I've lived through everything, both as caregiver and patient. I want other families to not figure it out alone like I did. There's something else," Danny continued. "I want to stop experimental treatment. Danny, the treatment has slowed progression, but it's keeping me tethered to appointments that take time from the work I want to finish. I'd rather have 4 months of complete freedom to write than 6 months of managed decline. You don't know stopping treatment will only cost you 2 months. I'm not trying to maximize length of life anymore. I'm trying to maximize impact of the time left." Danny turned to face Travis. "If I work 4 hours every morning for 3 months, I can finish the comprehensive guide, complete video messages for all my advocacy families, and create a training program for future patient advocates." "What does Dr. Martinez think?" "She disagrees medically, but supports it personally. She's helping me create a research protocol around my decline, so my experience can contribute to understanding disease progression." Danny handed Travis a bound manuscript. "The Last Clear Day, A Patient's Guide to Preparing for Cognitive Decline. This is everything I wish I had known when diagnosed. How to prepare for loss of decision-making capacity. How to create systems for managing daily life as cognitive function decline. This could help thousands of families. The disease is going to win, Travis, but maybe something useful can come from watching it win." 6 weeks later, Travis received the call he'd been dreading. Danny had been found by his aide, sitting at his computer, staring at a blank screen with no memory of who he was or where he was. When Travis arrived, Danny was calm but completely disoriented. "I'm sorry," Danny said politely. "I seem confused about where I am. Do you know who I'm supposed to call?" It was the beginning of the end they'd both known was coming. 3 months after Danny's final cognitive collapse, Travis stood before 500 families affected by Alzheimer's, holding 2 published books bearing Danny's name. Danny Reeves understood that his battle with early-onset Alzheimer's was a fight he was going to lose, Travis told the audience, but he refused to let that defeat be meaningless. The guides he created during his final months have already helped hundreds of families. The 2 books, Letters to Family, A Guide Through the Darkness, and The Last Clear Day, A Patient's Guide to Preparing for Cognitive Decline, had become essential resources nationwide. The patient advocacy program Danny designed was being implemented in medical centers across the country. Most importantly, Danny's documented decline provided researchers with unprecedented data about disease progression, improving protocols for future clinical trials. Travis thought about their last coherent conversation, days before the final collapse. "Do you think it was worth it?" Danny had asked. "All of this, the trial, the books, the advocacy work." "Danny," Travis had replied, "you've turned your tragedy into other people's hope. If that's not making a difference, I don't know what is." The Community Heroes Foundation had expanded to include Alzheimer's support, funding research Danny had identified as promising, and providing resources no family should navigate alone. In his final video message, Danny had said, "The measure of a life isn't how long it lasts, but how much light it leaves behind. If these words help even one family feel less alone in their darkest moment, then my illness will have served a purpose greater than the pain it caused." As Travis drove through Kansas City streets, where his friend had once lived in a tent, he carried the knowledge that Danny Reeves, boy genius who became homeless veteran, who became patient advocate, who became author, who became beacon of hope, had left enough light to guide countless others through their own darkness. The friendship that seemed lost forever had become a legacy that would outlast them both.